protesters gathered in Pakistan's biggest city, chanting against the United States. They say their country has been insulted by US President Donald Trump. The reason? His first tweet of the new year was an attack on Pakistan. On the streets of Karachi, that was seen as a betrayal.
This statement of Trump is in fact an insult to Pakistan's role in his cooperation with America. This has always been the attitude of America. It leaves its friends after its task is accomplished.
Trump administration has been talking about this issue for quite some time now. The fact that on one hand, Pakistan takes billions of dollars from the US, while on the other, seemingly supporting groups that the US is fighting actively against in Afghanistan. Well, today there were mass protests across Pakistan in response to this threat to withdraw funding as Islamic groups held rallies in major Pakistani cities. Ironically, among them was one radical group connected to the Mumbai attack. Protesters chanted against the US and President Trump and called for the US ambassador to be expelled after President Trump tweeted this on Monday. The United States has foolishly given Pakistan more than $33 billion in aid over the last 15 years, and they have given us nothing but lies and deceit, thinking of our leaders as fools. They have given safe haven to the terrorists we hunt in Afghanistan with little help. No more. This pressure from the Trump administration began back in August when the US said it would hold up $255 million to the Pakistani military until they cracked down on extremists. On Monday, the Trump administration said that was still the plan. The relationship between the two countries has been on a downward spiral ever since Osama bin Laden was killed in the Pakistani town of Abbottabad in 2011. The US also tracked down and killed Taliban leader Mullah Mansour in the country in 2016. Now, yesterday, Pakistan did make one small change. They actually banned all donations to groups which were on the UN Security Council sanctions list. But other people feel that nothing will really change as long as Pakistan sees Afghanistan and the Taliban as useful allies, or at least a buffer zone against India. And of course, remember that Pakistan is a nuclear-armed country, and for that reason needs to be kept stable as can be.
Pakistan's cabinet and military chiefs have held an emergency meeting in response to President Donald Trump's New Year's Day tweet accusing the country of lies and deceit. They've accused him of using social media once again for domestic consumption. Opposition leader Imran Khan also slammed Trump for attacking Pakistan's record on terrorism. He said Trump has no understanding of the war in Afghanistan and the destruction it has caused in Pakistan. It seems like he has no background knowledge about it at all.
In Afghanistan, the first American casualties of the new year. An American soldier was killed and 4 others wounded during a combat operation yesterday near the Pakistan border. Senator Cory Booker identified the dead soldier as 34-year-old Sergeant Mihail Golin of Fort Lee, New Jersey.
To Ramallah now, and a spokesman for the Palestinian president condemned an Israeli law on Jerusalem passed overnight, saying it was pushing the region into the abyss. The Israeli parliament, the Knesset, had passed a law making it more difficult to surrender parts of Jerusalem as part of a future deal with the Palestinians. The bill's sponsor said it would prevent Israeli concessions, insisting that Jerusalem will never be on the negotiating table. Speaking today with official PA media outlet Wafa, spokesman Nabil Abu-Rudaini said the vote by Israeli lawmakers indicates that Israel has declared the end of the political process.
US President Donald Trump has threatened to cut aid to the Palestinians over their refusal to enter peace negotiations with Israel. In a tweet, Trump said the Palestinians gave the US no appreciation or respect for the hundreds of millions of dollars and were no longer willing to talk peace. Earlier, US Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, threatened to cut aid to the UN's Palestinian Refugee Agency unless the Palestinians enter peace talks. They're refusing to accept the US as a mediator in the peace process or meet US officials in protest at the US recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
All right, guys, a Palestinian shoe store in Ramallah is stepping on a few heels with a controversial sign near its entrance. Addressed to all British and American citizens, the sign asks shoppers to offer their apologies for causing pain and suffering to the Palestinians before they set foot inside the store, of course. Here's the not-so-welcome sign right in the front window of the Ramallah shoe store. It reads that before entering, you should offer your apologies and hold responsibility for the Balfour Declaration and Trump's dirty decision, which has caused all of the pain and suffering for the Palestinians since its declaration till this very moment. Followed by a very polite, "You are most welcome." While many find it laughably unreasonable to hold common tourists accountable for decisions made by government leaders, either recently or 100 years ago, others are even more outraged. Israel's coordinator of government activities in the territories has condemned the sign as totally offensive and has even warned that mixing politics and tourism will only hurt local Palestinian commerce.
We turn overseas tonight and to Iran. Protesters taking to the streets again tonight, nearly a week now. Clashes with authorities turning deadly. And President Trump tweeting in support of those protesters, even as Iran's supreme leader is now blaming enemies for provoking the unrest. And some authorities now warning of the death penalty.
More amateur video of anti-government protests in Iran has surfaced, here showing an attack on a police station in the center of the country where 6 people were killed. At least 21 people have died since the demonstration started last week over rising food prices. They've since grown into the biggest challenge to Iran's clerical leadership in 8 years. Here, protesters can be seen marching through Tehran chanting, "Death to the dictator." On Twitter, U.S. President Donald Trump rejoicing. The people of Iran are finally acting against the brutal and corrupt Iranian regime. Hundreds of people have been arrested, and a prominent judge has warned that some could face death penalty trials. The government said 90% of the detainees were under 25 years old, signaling frustration among youths over the country's economic situation and lack of social freedoms.
Demonstrations of solidarity with protesters in Iran have been taking place in several European capitals, including Berlin. Members of a Kurdish-linked Iranian refugee association claim many of those arrested back home are being put under pressure to confess to being tools of the West. We know that they need the support of Iranians in exile, which is why we're here. Many of us here have experienced several of these protests in Iran in the last decades, in the 1980s, the 1990s, and again about 8 years ago in 2009. In Rome, a group of around 30 demonstrators said to be part of the militant Mujahideen movement displayed placards reading "Stop executions" and "No to Rouhani." The diversity of exiles supporting the protests reflects the wide spectrum of grievances behind the current unrest back home. In London, it was supporters of the Shah who fled into exile just before the 1979 Islamic Revolution who came out to show their support.
Anti-government protests in Iran have offered President Donald Trump a new reason to scrap the Iran nuclear deal. This could be a risky move that Trump supporters are cheering, but that critics warn could play into Tehran's hands. But some people familiar with administration deliberations say that the moment of vulnerability for Iran's nearly 40-year-old fundamentalist regime may move Trump to grander action. Many other Middle East experts and former U.S. officials dispute that rationale, however, warning that pulling the plug on the nuclear deal would throw Iran's embattled Islamic leaders a lifeline. The July 2015 agreement slowed Iran's steady march toward a nuclear weapons capability, scaling back and limiting its atomic program in return for an end to punishing U.S. and European economic sanctions. European leaders have also urged Trump to preserve the deal, arguing that restored U.S. sanctions would empower regime hardliners who say the U.S. cannot be trusted and would lead Iran to restart its nuclear program.
Iran's supreme leader has accused the country's enemies of stirring days of protests that have claimed at least 22 lives. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was speaking for the first time since the protests erupted last Thursday, adding that President Donald Trump, who denounced the Iranian regime, should focus on, quote, hungry people in the United States. While analysts say the supreme leader's reference to enemies is a swipe at Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the U.S., here's American ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, today at the Security Council addressing the accusations made by Iran.
Now the Iranian dictatorship is trying to do what it always does, which is to say that the protests were designed by Iran's enemies. We all know that's complete nonsense. The demonstrations are completely spontaneous. They are virtually in every city in Iran. This is the precise picture of a long oppressed people rising up against their dictators.
Protests broke out in cities across India's Maharashtra state as Dalits, the lowest class in India's caste system, threw stones and disrupted traffic. The protests began during the Dalits' annual Koregan Bhima celebration. Dalits consider the 1818 Koregan Bhima battle a victory against oppression because the so-called untouchables helped British forces defeat upper-class Indians. On Monday, January 1st, Dalits clashed with members of right-wing Hindu groups in the city of Pune outside Mumbai. Reuters reported conflict resulted in the death of an unidentified 28-year-old man. In Mumbai, police said protesters throwing rocks disrupted transportation lines. Police detained more than 100 people. Dalit leaders called for more protests around Maharashtra state on Wednesday. Maharashtra Chief Minister Devendra Fadnavis called for peace and ordered an inquiry by a high court judge into Monday's violence.
So, let's start with US President Donald Trump's latest tweet on the North Korea issue, responding to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's New Year's address about him having a nuclear button on his desk. President Trump has come out swinging in his now customary unconventional fashion. Trump tweeted, "Will someone from his depleted and food-starved regime please inform him that I too have a nuclear button," before adding that his nuclear button is, quote, "a much bigger and more powerful one," and that, unlike Kim's, his actually works. Trump's response to a statement from the North Korean leader again raises tensions in the brewing confrontation between Washington and Pyongyang, despite South Korea moving to open talks with the regime.
North and South Korea may restart direct talks with plans for North Korea to participate in the 2018 Olympic Games. South Korean leadership seems eager to include North Korean athletes in the upcoming Games. It would give some insurance against another missile or nuclear test by the North to disrupt the Games. North Korea has participated in the Olympics off and on, but the country boycotted the 1988 Games in Seoul. In an effort to interfere with those games, Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il ordered the bombing of a South Korean airliner, killing more than 100 people. But since taking power in 2011, Kim Jong-un has occasionally used sporting events to further inter-Korean dialogue. In 2014, he sent North Korean officials to South Korea to celebrate his country's showing in that year's Asian Games. That led to talks between the North and South in 2015, some of the last direct negotiations between the two Korean governments. Moon Jae-in's administration has yet to hold talks with Kim's regime. South Korea's unification ministry said talks could begin as soon as next week.
Nikki Haley, the United States ambassador to the United Nations, issued a warning to North Korea on Tuesday, saying that the United States will never accept a nuclear North Korea. Haley went on to say that she hopes rumors that North Korea is preparing for another missile test are untrue.
China tested a missile in November that is equipped with a hypersonic glide vehicle, or HGV. HGVs break apart from the main body of the missile after it has reached its highest altitude. After they break off, they glide to the target until impact. An HGV is maneuverable and can travel at hypersonic speed. According to a 2017 report by the National Air and Space Intelligence Center, the combination of high speed, maneuverability, and relatively low altitude makes them challenging targets for missile defense systems. The United States and Russia have also been trying to develop HGVs, but neither have flight-tested an operational prototype.
Egypt's president has issued a decree to extend a nationwide state of emergency for 3 months as fear of terrorism still lingers. The country's state news agency said on Tuesday that the extension will start from the 13th of this month in order to help tackle what it called the dangers and funding of terrorism. Egypt first imposed the current state of emergency last April after 2 church bombings killed at least 45 people. It was extended twice, once in July and again in October. The country faces an ISIS insurgency in the North Sinai region that has killed hundreds of policemen, soldiers and civilians.
New York City officials announced a plan on Tuesday that will install 1,500 barriers to protect pedestrians from vehicle attacks in high-profile areas. Ydanis Rodriguez, who introduced the legislation, said the barriers will make New York an even safer, more walkable city. The city recently conducted a review on how to secure streets and public spaces in light of recent vehicular terror attacks. 2 recent incidents took place in the past year, one in November, which killed 8 people, and another in May, which killed 1. New York Mayor Bill de Blasio said about the $50 million plan, "You've seen the temporary barriers, but we knew we needed long-term solutions, permanent barriers integrated into the life of the city."
Israel has ordered thousands of African migrants to leave the country or go to jail. It's offering them $3,500 each to leave within 90 days to their own countries or third countries, or face jail from April. Children, elderly people and victims of slavery and human trafficking are exempt from the order. The UN Refugee Agency denounced the plan as a violation of international law, but Israel says those who enter the country illegally must go.
It might be a brand new year, but the European Union is already facing the same old problems. Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki says his government won't meet the EU's mandatory refugee quotas, set to help take the burden off Italy and Greece. We are invariably of the opinion formulated by the Law and Justice Party ahead of the elections in 2015 that we will not be receiving migrants from the Middle East and North Africa in Poland.
Do Polski, ponieważ jest to nasza suwerenna decyzja imigrantów z Bliskiego Wschodu I z Północnej Afryki.
That doesn't mean the country isn't pulling its weight, Morawiecki said during the interview with Radio Poland. On the eastern borders of the European Union, we contribute a lot to lowering tensions, since we have already received tens of thousands and maybe even hundreds of thousands of refugees from Ukraine, but we don't give them asylum status. Last month, the European Commission said it would sue Poland, Hungary and the Czech Republic for refusing to host asylum seekers. Poland has already clashed with the Commission regarding recent judicial reforms.
A new law is being strictly enforced in Germany against offensive posts online. Known as the Network Enforcement Act, the law requires social media platforms and services to delete offensive posts. It went into effect on January 1st and applies to Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, Google, and YouTube, though LinkedIn and WhatsApp are excluded. Specifically, the law requires platforms like Facebook or Twitter to investigate complaints of hate speech within 24 hours and handle the issue within a week. According to reports, the deputy leader of far-right party AfD, Beatrix von Storch, had her Twitter account temporarily suspended due to a tweet regarding Muslims.
Mystery over the last day or so about WikiLeaks editor Julian Assange. He kicked off the new year with a cryptic message. He took to Twitter with a seemingly indecipherable code and a link to a popular rap song. It left many people scratching their heads.
One of the reasons it's so difficult to create a cure for the flu is because the virus continually shapeshifts from season to season. This means that getting annual flu shots instead of a more permanent solution to the problem. Researchers from the University of Washington School of Medicine may have just changed that forever. The investigators in Professor Deborah Fuller's lab have developed a DNA vaccine that could lead to a universal one-dose flu vaccine.
January 31st will bring a celestial event known as a blue moon, an occurrence that happens every 2 to 3 years. While interesting on its own, the real kicker is this blue moon will be the first lunar eclipse of a blue moon in nearly 150 years. Unfortunately for most Americans, this event will be a no-show. The easternmost part of North America and the majority of South America will catch the tail end of the eclipse, with the moon dipping below the horizon at 6:48 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.